The night the twins couldn't sleep, the mansion felt colder than usual. Marco De Luca stood in the doorway of the nursery, shoulders rigid beneath his perfectly tailored suit. His hands, the same hands that could sign contracts, move millions, or command men to die, were clenched at his sides. The soft light from the moon through the high windows fell across the polished floor, glinting off the gold inlays of the cribs. Yet the grandeur didn't matter. None of it did. Sophia and Lucia lay wide-eyed in their cribs, trembling with the kind of fear that wasn't born of nightmares but absence. Their mother had been gone for 6 months, killed cleanly, professionally, leaving him with a mansion full of security, silence, and grief too heavy for anyone to carry alone. "They won't stop," the night nurse whispered behind him, her voice cautious. "They wake every hour, screaming, asking for her." He didn't turn. He didn't need to. The word "her" burned in his mind every time he heard it, and he had long ago learned to suppress anything that might betray weakness. He swallowed and said nothing, because no one, not nurses, not doctors, not even him, could fix what had been lost. "I said leave," he muttered, voice low and sharp, more command than request. The nurse hesitated, her eyes flitting nervously toward the girls. "Sir, maybe." "Leave," he repeated, and she obeyed immediately, retreating into the hall like a shadow, afraid to disturb the cold order of the house. Marco remained, watching the twins, feeling a gnawing emptiness where control had never reached before. He could orchestrate the deaths of rivals with a flick of a hand. He could secure entire districts with whispers in the right ears. But he couldn't soothe the children that looked at him now, their tiny faces pinched and desperate. From the hallway came a soft sound, careful footsteps, hesitant, almost apologetic. He turned sharply. A maid froze in the doorway. She was young, probably no older than 25, with hair braided tightly down her back, and sleeves rolled neatly over her wrists. Her uniform was plain, functional, unremarkable, but her eyes betrayed something else. Fear, yes, but also resolve. "I heard them crying," she stammered, voice small and cautious. "I thought maybe I could help." Marco's patience, already thin from weeks of restless nights, frayed. "This is not your concern," he said. The girl flinched, retreating a step. "Of course, sir." "I'll stay," Marco said abruptly, the single word sharper than any command he ever issued to his men. She froze. The twins screamed again, a sharp, piercing sound that made the floorboards vibrate beneath his polished shoes. Sophia's tiny fists beat the air, and Lucia's soft cries broke into full sobs. Without thinking, the maid stepped forward. Her movements were careful, deliberate. She didn't look at Marco. She went straight to the cribs. "She likes stories," she said quietly, her eyes on the children, not him, the one on the left. "The other prefers to be sung to." Marco's chest tightened. "How do you know that?" "I clean here every day," she said softly. "I listen." Sophia's cries softened at her voice. Lucia's whimpers became mere sighs. Marco's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He could command fear and loyalty, but this tenderness was foreign, dangerous even. The maid leaned over, resting one hand lightly on the rail of the crib. Not touching, not intruding, only waiting. It was enough. She hummed a soft, broken melody, one that Marco could feel tugging at something deep in his chest, though he couldn't place why. It wasn't refined, not polished. It was just real. Human. Lucia pressed herself against the maid's shoulder. Sophia, still tense, reached out one tiny hand and touched her sleeve. Marco's throat went dry. "Put her down," he said, voice harsh, the first command of his life directed at someone who wasn't his enemy. The maid paused, then shook her head. "She'll wake again if I do." Marco's chest tightened further. Rage, fear, something foreign and dangerous, helplessness. The maid, Elena, cradled the girls against her chest, humming until the tremors in their bodies subsided. Within minutes, they were asleep, deep, untroubled sleep that Marco had thought impossible. He didn't move. He couldn't move. She lowered the girls into their cribs, eyes meeting his for a fraction of a second. Something flickered their recognition, empathy, perhaps both. "You'll come here again," Marco said finally, voice low, measured. "At night. You will not speak of this. You will not touch them unless I say so." Elena nodded, as if she had understood rules far older than him. Marco watched her retreat down the hall. His daughter slept. Safe. Finally. But in that quiet, perfectly still nursery, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Not for himself, but for the woman who had dared to cross the line no one else would. And he realized something far more dangerous, that he might already need her more than he wanted to admit. The silence of the mansion that night wasn't peaceful. It was heavy with a question Marco didn't yet know the answer to. Would he let her in, or would he destroy the one person who had saved his daughter's hearts? The answer would come soon, and nothing in his carefully ordered world would ever be the same. Elena didn't sleep that night either. She lay on the narrow cot in the servants' quarters, the hum of the mansion's central heating filling the silence. Her arms ached from holding the twins, from bending to their tiny needs, from the tension she carried as if it were a second skin. She traced the patterns in the ceiling, shadows from the chandelier, twisting in slow rotations, thinking about what she had just done. She had calmed 2 children who had refused sleep for weeks, and yet the victory felt fragile, temporary. Morning came too quickly, pale light filtering through the heavy curtains. Elena moved quietly, not daring to wake the twins. She passed through the corridors with her hands clenched at her sides, already rehearsing apologies she hadn't yet made to Marco. Even as a maid, she knew the house had rules that were absolute. She had broken one of the unspoken laws by touching, by comforting, by bringing life to a room that had only known silence and fear. Marco found her mid-morning, standing by the sweeping staircase as she carried laundry. His presence was sudden, commanding, and Elena felt the air tighten around her. He was impeccably dressed, as always, but there was a shadow under his eyes she hadn't seen before. She lowered her gaze instinctively. "You did it again," he said, voice low, carrying both accusation and an undercurrent of awe. Elena froze. I saw you in the nursery last night," he continued, stepping closer. The girls slept, for the first time in weeks, and yet his eyes narrowed, scanning her face, like he could read intentions she hadn't even acknowledged herself. "You're not mine to trust." "I didn't mean," Elena began, but he interrupted. "You didn't mean to what?" "To break the rules of my house. To defy me in front of my daughters. To matter." The last word hung in the air. Elena's chest constricted. She had felt it too. The strange, dangerous pull she wasn't supposed to feel in the presence of a man like Marco De Luca, a man who commanded entire districts, a man whose name alone could stop men in their tracks, was standing here, scrutinizing her like she was a puzzle. "I didn't want to overstep," she said softly. "I only wanted them to feel safe." Marco's jaw tightened. He turned and gestured toward the nursery. "Come with me." Elena hesitated, then followed, heart pounding. The hallway felt longer, colder, as if the house itself was aware of what was about to unfold. Inside the nursery, the girls were awake but calm, sitting up in their cribs. Sophia's wide eyes followed Marco, while Lucia's gaze was fixed on Elena, as if recognizing the one person who had brought warmth in a cold world. "Stay," Marco said suddenly, the command firm but almost pleading. He glanced at Elena. "Observe. Do not interfere. Just watch." Elena's hands trembled slightly, but she nodded. The sight of Marco, usually untouchable and commanding, kneeling in front of the twins and speaking softly to them, softened something in her chest. He was patient, careful, a father trying desperately to bridge the distance left by grief. She watched him stroke Sophia's hair, humming a low, almost reluctant tune, coaxing laughter from her where only tears had existed before. Lucia pressed against Marco's shoulder, and he didn't flinch. He held her as if he were balancing something precious and fragile, a weight heavier than any power or money he had ever commanded. Elena realized then that Marco De Luca, the man who had built walls around his heart, was just as lost as the children he tried to protect. For a long while, none of them spoke. The only sound was Sophia's soft giggles and Lucia's tiny sighs as sleep reclaimed her. Marco's stern expression softened just slightly, revealing vulnerability that only Elena seemed to notice. Finally, Marco looked at her. His eyes were intense, dangerous, and yet human. "You don't understand what you've done," he said quietly. "I think I do," she replied, voice barely above a whisper. "I gave them a chance to trust again. Marco's gaze didn't waver. You've done more than that. You've reminded me what it means to care without control, to protect without fear. And now, he paused, voice tight. Now, I don't know what to do with that. Elena swallowed, realizing the weight of his words. This was no longer just about the twins' sleep, about her job, or her presence in the house. She had crossed a line she hadn't even known existed, a line where power, love, fear, and trust collided, leaving both of them exposed. Sophia stirred, rubbing her eyes, and whispered Elena's name. Lucia followed suit, her tiny hands reaching out for her. Mark watched, unflinching, as the maid who had dared the unthinkable became the center of his daughter's world. I can't let them rely on you, he said finally, voice heavy. And yet he stopped, swallowing hard. I don't know if I can do this without you either. Elena felt a strange tremor in her chest. She had expected anger, reprimand, perhaps dismissal, not this raw, honest vulnerability from the man who ruled everything but his own heart. Then what do we do? She asked quietly. Marco didn't answer immediately. He glanced down at his daughters, sleeping softly now and then back at her. We survive, he said finally. But surviving doesn't mean forgetting what matters. Elena understood the unspoken meaning. In his world, showing emotion was dangerous. Allowing attachment could be fatal. And yet, in front of her, he had let both slip, if only for a moment. The house fell silent again, the calm after a storm. But the air between them had shifted, heavier now, charged with something. Neither had planned for something that would not easily be undone. And as Elena left the nursery, her heart still racing, she realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The unthinkable she had done, the simple act of calming to crying children, had begun to unravel the careful order of the De Luca mansion, and perhaps the unspoken armor around the man who ruled it. For the first time in weeks, Marco De Luca didn't sleep that night either. The next week unfolded like a slow storm. Elena had returned to her duties, yet the mansion felt different now. She moved through the halls with a heightened awareness, as if every shadow might carry eyes, every whisper could be a secret, and in some ways, it did. Marco's presence was heavier, more deliberate, but he also allowed cracks in his armor that she hadn't seen before. Small moments, when his guard slipped, when his expression softened as he watched the twins. The girls had changed as well. Sophia, once restless and defiant, now lingered near Elena, her small hand brushing against the maid's sleeve whenever she passed. Lucia, who had never let anyone touch her without shrieking, allowed Elena to braid her hair at night. The girls' trust grew quietly, like a river carving a path through stone. With each step, Marco's control over his own emotions became less absolute. One afternoon, Elena found herself in the kitchen, preparing afternoon tea for the household staff, when Marco appeared without warning. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. She didn't startle. She had grown used to the way he appeared silently, the way his presence filled a room before his words did. You spend too much time worrying about others, he said softly. You forget to worry about yourself. Elena's hands paused over the teapot. I worry because it matters, she replied. Because they matter. He pushed off the doorway, stepping closer. And yet you risk yourself anyway. You risk them and me with every step you take. Her gaze met his. I can't stand by and do nothing. Marco studied her carefully, the weight of the world in his eyes. You don't know what this house really is, he said. What I am. Elena didn't flinch. I know enough. He frowned. Do you? Her silence was her answer. The twins came running, laughter spilling through the marble halls. Sophia's curls bounced as she reached Elena first, arms outstretched. Lucia followed, smaller, shyer, but just as insistent. Marco knelt, opening his arms to them. Elena watched as his rough, powerful hands handled them with a care that felt entirely at odds with his reputation. You've made them softer, he said quietly, almost to himself. Elena smiled faintly, brushing a hand along Lucia's back. No, she said. They were always soft. You just forgot how to see it. He looked up at her then, eyes dark and unreadable. And what about you? He asked, voice low. Have you forgotten how to be seen? She met his gaze steadily, heart pounding. Maybe, but not tonight. The moment broke as Sophia tugged at Marco's sleeve. "Papa, will you tell us a story?" she asked, voice tiny but persistent. Marco's jaw flexed. He hesitated. Then, slowly, carefully, he picked up the smaller of the two storybooks. He cleared his throat, an unusual softness in his posture as he read aloud. Elena watched, entranced, as the man who could command armies softened in front of two small girls. Night came quietly. Elena sat outside the nursery door, listening to the soft rhythm of the twins' breathing. Marco was still inside, kneeling beside the crib, speaking in low, gentle tones. She thought she understood the unthinkable he had allowed her to do, to love his daughters, to soothe them, to give them something he couldn't. And yet she realized there was more. She had also changed him. When he finally emerged, she stood, pretending to check her duties. His eyes followed her. "You saved them," he said quietly. "And in doing so, you've saved me as well." Elena's chest tightened. "I only did what I had to." "No," he said, voice firm. "You did more than that. You've made me see what it means to be more than a name, more than power, more than fear." The words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Elena swallowed, aware of the dangerous pull between them. She could feel it every time their hands brushed, every time their eyes met across the room, every time the twins reached for her, and he watched, silent, just observing. Days turned into weeks. The house became a delicate balance of control and care. Marco continued to run his empire with precision, yet his evenings were spent more and more with the children. He began to teach them small things, read to them, even laugh with them. A sound Elena had thought impossible to hear from him. One evening, she found him on the balcony, looking out over the city. The sun had set, and the lights below twinkled like distant stars. She joined him quietly. "They're asleep," she said softly. He didn't turn. "Yes," he murmured. "And for a moment, it feels like I can breathe." Elena glanced at him, noting the lines in his face, the tension that never quite left him. "You can breathe," she said. "You just have to let yourself." He finally looked at her, eyes dark, intense, and unreadable. "Do you think I can?" She stepped closer. "I think you already are." For a brief moment, they stood together in silence, two people drawn together by necessity, circumstance, and the unspoken bond forged through trust, fear, and care. And yet, as the wind whispered through the balcony, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would test the fragile peace they had built, the unthinkable trust she had offered, and the tentative connection growing between them. She tightened her grip on her apron, bracing herself, because in the house of Marco De Luca, calm was always temporary, and the night had only just begun. The following nights felt heavier, the mansion no longer just a home but a cage of quiet tension. Elena had settled into a rhythm with the twins. She bathed them, read to them, sang lullabies, and watched as their trust in her grew with every small gesture. Yet every time she saw Marco in the halls, his sharp eyes scanning, his jaw tight, the faint scar at the corner of his mouth, she felt the weight of unspoken danger. He was still a man of power, a man whose enemies whispered in the shadows and struck without warning. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city, painting the mansion in shades of amber and gray, Elena found herself in the nursery alone with the twins. Marco had left for an unexpected meeting, leaving her to calm the girls herself. Sophia and Lucia, usually calm with her, clung to her tonight with a ferocity she hadn't seen before. "They're coming," Sophia whispered, voice trembling. "Who, sweetie?" Elena asked gently, brushing a curl from her forehead. "The people," Sophia replied. "The ones Papa says are dangerous." Elena froze. The words were innocent, naive even, but the fear in the girl's eyes made her stomach tighten. She hadn't told the twins about the underworld, about the enemies, about the reasons their mother was gone. Marco had shielded them from the truth, or at least tried. "Shh," Elena said softly, holding them close. "No one is coming. You're safe." Lucia buried her face against Elena's chest, trembling. Elena hummed, rocking them slowly, but even as she did, the hairs on the back of her neck prickled. Something in the mansion's usual silence felt wrong. By the time Marco returned, late and exhausted, the air was heavy with tension. He didn't smile when he entered the nursery. He didn't glance at Elena. He went straight to the twins, kneeling beside them, checking that they were unharmed. You told them? He asked finally, his voice low, sharp. No, Elena said. They were scared. I calmed them. That's all. Marco studied her, his eyes unreadable. Then he nodded once. Good. But stay close. Don't leave their side. Not for a moment. Elena's chest tightened. Of course. That night after the twins slept, Elena found herself sitting outside Marco's study. The door was closed, the soft hum of his office lights spilling into the hallway. She hesitated, then knocked softly. Enter, his voice called. Clipped but not unkind. She stepped in. Marco was seated behind his desk, reviewing documents, but his attention was elsewhere. He didn't look at her immediately. They were frightened tonight, she said. Yes, he replied, finally meeting her gaze. His eyes were dark, sharp, but beneath that was a raw vulnerability she hadn't expected. And yet, you managed what I could not. Elena's hands twisted together. I just wanted them to sleep. More than that, he said. You gave them peace, something I couldn't give. And now his jaw tightened. I don't know how to repay that. Her heart ached at the raw honesty in his voice. Marco De Luca, untouchable, feared by hundreds, and yet here he was powerless, in front of something smaller, gentler, human. I'm not here for repayment, she said softly. I'm here because they need someone. He leaned back, silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, and what about you, Elena? Who needs you? The question hung between them, fragile and dangerous. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Words felt useless. The next day, the tension escalated. A rival gang tested the estate's defense's minor breaches. Suspicious vehicles, anonymous messages left in coded form. Marco's men acted quickly, but the threat reminded Elena that no matter how tender the moments with the twins, danger was always at the doorstep. That evening, as the house settled into its uneasy calm, Marco found Elena again in the nursery. He didn't speak immediately. He simply watched her tend to the twins, brushing Sophia's hair and soothing Lucia's small cries. You've changed them, he said finally. No, she replied. You've reminded them what safety feels like. You just forgot what it was. He swallowed hard, the faintest flicker of emotion crossing his face. I've forgotten a lot, he said quietly. Elena met his gaze steadily. Then let me help you remember. For the first time, he allowed himself to take a deep breath, not the controlled, measured breaths of a man in command, but a human breath, unguarded. And in that quiet exchange, something shifted. The line between duty and desire blurred, leaving them both unsure where protection ended and something far more dangerous connection, trust, maybe even love began. As Elena left the nursery that night, she paused at the doorway, glancing back. Marco watched her go. Tension in his shoulders, shadows in his eyes, and a thought flickered through his mind, one he didn't dare voice. If I let her in, will I ever be able to let her go? And in the darkness of the mansion, the unthinkable was no longer the act of calming two children. It was the possibility of letting someone touch the part of his heart he had sealed for years. The first knock came just after midnight. Elena had been sitting in the nursery with the twins asleep in her lap, the room illuminated only by the faint glow of a nightlight. She hadn't noticed the storm outside, rain hammering the roof and wind rattling the shutters, until the sharp, insistent knock echoed through the hallway. Her heart froze. She had been warned, subtly, about the dangers that lingered outside the walls of the De Luca estate. But tonight the fear felt immediate, tangible. Sophia stirred, mumbling in her sleep, and Lucia nestled closer to her chest. Elena rose quietly, cradling the girls, and tiptoed to the door. She peeked through the peephole, expecting shadows, strangers, or threats. Instead, she saw a courier drenched from the rain, shaking, but holding a small, folded envelope. He didn't speak, only extended the envelope toward her through the gap. Elena took it cautiously. The handwriting was elegant and familiar. No stamp, no return address, just her name. She opened it slowly, heart hammering. The note inside was simple, almost clinical. We know who you are. We know what you mean to him. Step away, or everything you love will burn. Her blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear. But as she looked down at the sleeping twins in her arms, she realized something. She couldn't. She would not abandon them. Not now. By the time she reached Marco's study, the rain had soaked her coat, and her hands were trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of the threat. She knocked lightly, her voice barely audible. "Marco, we have a problem," she said as he opened the door. His expression shifted instantly. Calm, controlled, untouchable, the man she had seen command empires was replaced by something sharper, colder, more dangerous. His eyes scanned her, the girls, the envelope. He snatched the paper from her hands and read it, jaw tightening with every word. Marco De Luca didn't flinch at threat slightly, but this had the edges of a blade, aimed straight at the heart of the family he had begun to protect. "They're threatening you," Elena whispered, barely keeping her voice steady. "No," he said, voice low and deliberate. "They're threatening us, my daughters. You. Everything that matters." He glanced at her, the storm of his fury barely restrained. "You shouldn't have come to me with this." "I couldn't hide it," she said softly. "I won't hide them." Marco's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, before hardening again. "Then we fight." Over the next days, the mansion transformed. Men moved silently through the halls, securing doors, checking cameras, running patrols. Marco coordinated with his most trusted lieutenants, issuing commands with precision and cold clarity. Every inch of the estate was monitored. Elena stayed close, observing, learning, protecting. The twins were restless. Sophia and Lucia began waking in the middle of the night, frightened, sensing the invisible tension that had seeped into the walls. Elena held them, hummed lullabies, whispered reassurances. She had done the unthinkable once before, calming them when even Marco couldn't. But this time, the stakes were higher. One evening, as Elena settled the twins back into their cribs, Marco entered silently, watching her. He didn't speak immediately, only observed the way she held the girls, how her soft humming carried a weight stronger than any walls he had built around them. "You always know what to do," he said finally, "even when I don't." Elena looked up, wary. "I only do what's necessary. What they need." "Necessary," he repeated, his voice tight. "That's exactly it. You act out of necessity yet. You've done what no one else could. You've earned their trust. And in doing so," he paused, struggling, his jaw clenched, "you've earned mine as well." Her heart skipped. She had expected gratitude, maybe acknowledgement, but not this raw honesty. Marco, the man who had rolled with fear and precision, was vulnerable, and for once she was the one holding the thread of connection. The next night, the threat became more tangible. A minor explosion at the outer gate, a warning, precise and controlled. Marco's men handled it quickly, but the message was clear. Someone was testing the boundaries, testing his patience, testing them all. Elena stayed in the nursery that night, sitting beside the cribs, listening to every sound, the distant echo of men in the hall, the whisper of rain against the windows, the soft breathing of the twins. Marco eventually came in, kneeling between the cribs, silently watching over them. They exchanged no words, only glances and understanding passing between them. Trust had grown where fear once ruled, and in the quiet, they realized something neither had expected. They were no longer just protector and caretaker. They were allies, partners in a world that demanded both ruthlessness and tenderness, survival and love. And yet, in the back of Elena's mind, a question lingered, one she dared not speak aloud. How far will we have to go to keep them safe? The mansion, once a home and fortress, had become a battlefield, and the unthinkable she had done, loving, protecting, giving peace, was only the beginning. Thought the rain had stopped, but the tension in the mansion hung heavier than ever. Elena sat in the nursery with the twins asleep in their cribs, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Even in the soft glow of the nightlight, she could feel the unease in the walls, in the air, in the quiet footsteps of the remaining staff. She had calmed the girls countless times, sung lullabies, whispered reassurances, but tonight was different. Tonight she understood fully that the danger lurking outside wasn't theoretical. It had names, faces, and intentions. Marco entered silently, as always. The faint click of his shoes on the marble floor sounded louder than any storm. He didn't speak immediately, only watched her. watched the twins, watched the quiet she had brought to the room. She sensed the weight of his thoughts, the careful calculation of a man who had once ruled the city with fear and precision. "They're testing us," he said finally, his voice low, almost a growl. "Last night was only a warning." Elena's chest tightened. "Then we'll be ready." He stepped closer, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You've been here every night. You've protected them. You've given them peace they haven't known since their mother died. Do you understand what that means?" "I do," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I know what it means to be needed, to matter." Marco exhaled, a long, low sound that carried more emotion than he usually allowed himself. "You matter to them, yes. But to me," his voice faltered. For a moment, he looked older, human, a man who had carried too much for too long. Elena's hands flexed. She wanted to reach out, to close the distance between them, but she hesitated. "You've saved them for years. I just helped." "No," he said firmly, kneeling beside the cribs. He adjusted Sophia under his arm, smoothing her hair with surprising tenderness. "You've done what I could not. And in doing so, you've changed everything." She swallowed hard. "Then let me help you," she whispered. Marco didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the girls, their small chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm, and then back at her. His gaze was almost pleading. "You shouldn't have come here. Not like this." "I had to," she said softly. "I couldn't leave them frightened." The tension between them was a quiet storm, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings neither could yet name. And then the first real test arrived. A phone call, short, precise, with a voice that chilled her blood. "We know who is protecting him. Step aside, or there will be consequences. All of you." Marco slammed the phone down, jaw clenched. Elena's heart raced. She knew the voice belonged to one of his rivals, someone meticulous, dangerous, and relentless. "They found us," Marco muttered. "And they'll push further." Elena moved closer, instinctively placing herself near him. "We've handled threats before," she said. "We'll handle this one too." He finally allowed himself a small nod, the slightest acknowledgement that he needed her presence not just for the twins, but for him. "You've changed everything, Elena. You've made this house more than a fortress. But danger doesn't care about that." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we prepare. Together." The next few days were a whirlwind of tension and strategy. Marco tightened the estate's defenses, rerouted patrols, and scrutinized every message, every movement. Elena learned more about the underworld he inhabited than she ever wanted. Yet she stayed. Steady, protective, unflinching. The twins sensed the difference too. They cried less, trusted more, and even Marco's sternest lessons became bearable with her near. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Elena found Marco alone on the balcony, staring at the city below. The lights flickered like distant stars, indifferent to the storms brewing in his life. "They've escalated," he said without looking at her. "And it's only going to get worse." Elena stepped closer. "We'll be ready." He turned then, eyes dark and intense, revealing vulnerability beneath the cold, unyielding exterior. "Are you sure? You've already risked everything by being here." "I'm sure," she said, voice unwavering. "I'm not leaving them. Not now, not ever." For the first time, Marco allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You're braver than anyone I've ever known." They stood in silence, the city below sprawling endlessly, the mansion around them both sanctuary and cage. And as the wind tugged at her hair, Elena realized that the unthinkable she had done, simply loving and protecting two children, had begun to weave a bond stronger than fear, stronger than threats, stronger than Marco's control. But as she looked into his eyes, she knew this calm would not last. Danger was coming, and the next test, she sensed, would not be fought with lullabies or whispers. It would demand everything they had, and perhaps more. The night closed around them, heavy, tense, and full of promise and peril alike. That storm hit just after midnight. Elena had been sitting in the nursery, the twins finally asleep in their cribs, when the first faint crash echoed through the mansion. At first, she thought it was the wind rattling the shutters, but then came the unmistakable sound of glass breaking a window on the far side of the estate. Her pulse quickened, and she froze, listening. The children stirred, murmuring in their sleep, and she held her breath, heart hammering. Marco appeared in the doorway without a sound, his coat slick with rain, eyes dark and alert. "Stay," he commanded, and she obeyed instinctively, clutching the edge of the crib. "Who's there?" Elena whispered. "No one friendly," he said, voice low, controlled, but edged with the tension of a man used to control being ripped away. "Get the twins out of the room. Now." Elena moved quickly, gathering Sophia and Lucia into her arms. Their little bodies clung to her, warm, trembling. Marco took the hallway, disappearing like a shadow, and she heard the faint click of gun safety being disengaged. She guided the girls through a hidden corridor they had discovered weeks before, one she had memorized but never dared to use until now. The rain was louder here, wind slamming against the walls, as if echoing the danger that stalked the estate. Elena's mind raced. She had calmed crying children countless times, but this was different. This was survival. When she reached the secure guest wing, she placed the twins on the soft bedding of a small room, their small hands clutching her apron. "It's okay," she whispered. "Everything is okay." Sophia's wide eyes met hers. "Papa?" "He's making sure we're safe," Elena said, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "He always keeps his word." Meanwhile, Marco moved silently through the main corridors. Shadows flickered in the corners of his vision, sounds of movement too precise to be random. He reached the source of the break in a window, forced open, and found two men attempting to bypass the security system. The fight was swift, brutal, precise. Marco's hands were steel, his voice authority, and the intruders faltered under his presence. He didn't hesitate. Every strike, every command was calculated. But behind it was a tension, a fear he didn't voice, fear for his daughters, for Elena, for the life he had begun to cherish. When the intruders finally fled into the night, wet and beaten, Marco allowed himself a single exhale. The mansion was quiet again, but he knew this was only the beginning. Returning to the nursery wing, he found Elena waiting, twins pressed close to her chest. She didn't speak, only met his gaze, the fear in her eyes mirroring his own. "You've been brave," he said quietly, kneeling beside the cribs, brushing a curl from Sophia's forehead. "And I," his voice faltered, raw and unguarded, "I don't know what I would do without you." Elena swallowed. "You'd do what you always do," she said softly. "Protect them, protect me, protect everyone you care for." He shook his head. "No, not like this. You've changed the rules. You've made me see what matters." Their eyes met, and in the quiet, charged space, something unspoken passed between them. Fear had forced honesty. Danger had stripped away pretense. And for the first time, Marco allowed himself to be seen not as a powerful, untouchable Mafia boss, but as a man who loved, who feared, and who had lost everything worth holding. Elena felt it too, the weight of his gaze, the vulnerability, the unspoken promise and plea. She had done the unthinkable by calming his daughters, yes, but now the unthinkable stretched further. She had made him care, and he had let her. For the rest of the night, they stayed together in the nursery wing. Elena kept the twins close while Marco patrolled silently, the lines of his face softened only when he glanced back at them. Words weren't necessary. Every glance, every touch, every breath carried meaning. By dawn, the storm had passed. Rain dripped from the roof, puddles gleamed in the driveway, and the city beyond remained indifferent to the battles within the walls of the De Luca mansion. Marco finally returned to the nursery, kneeling beside Elena and the twins. "You've done more than protect them," he said softly. "You've saved me too from the walls I built around myself." Elena met his gaze. "Then let's make sure it never has to happen again." He nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Together," he whispered, and in that quiet, fragile morning light, the house once cold, silent, and heavy with grief felt, for the first time, like a place that could hold love, danger, and hope all at once. The quiet in the mansion was deceptive. For days after the storm, the De Luca estate felt calm, almost peaceful. The twins laughed as they played under Elena's watchful eyes. Sophia's curls bounced with every step. Lucia's soft giggles filled the hallways, and Marco, despite the lingering tension of external threats, smiled more often, even if briefly, almost reluctantly. But Elena knew better. Danger never stayed away for long. It began with subtle signs. A shadow flickering at the edge of a hallway, a message slipped under a door with no signature, a car parked across the street that never moved. Marco noticed, of course. Every movement, every whisper, every stranger was catalogued and analyzed. He ran his empire with precision, but even he could not control everything. And tonight Elena felt it more than ever. She was in the nursery, tucking the twins into bed, when Marco appeared quietly in the doorway. His face was hard, lines of tension cutting across features. She had begun to understand features that once terrified her, now revealed the vulnerability of a man carrying more than anyone should. "They're closer," he said, voice low. "They've been testing the boundaries." Elena's stomach tightened. How close? He didn't answer immediately. He studied the girls, brushing a hand over Sophia's hair, smoothing the small crease in Lucia's brow. His presence was commanding, but tonight it was quieter, more human. "Close enough to strike at what I care for most," he said finally. Elena swallowed, gripping the edge of the crib. "Then we make sure they can't." He nodded. "And we do it together. No one else. Not now, not ever." The twins stirred, murmuring, sensing the tension that hung thick in the room. Elena held them close, whispering reassurances, and Marco sat beside them, silent but watchful, a shadow of protection. His hand brushed hers lightly, almost accidentally, but the gesture carried the weight of a promise that he trusted her, that he needed her, and that together they could withstand whatever came. For the next few nights, they planned quietly. Elena learned to anticipate movements, to read subtle signs, to fortify the twins' world with both care and vigilance. Marco coordinated defenses with his men, while she remained the anchor. For the children, a constant presence of warmth amid the tension. One night, as she hummed softly to lull Lucia to sleep, Sophia tugged at her sleeve. "Elena, Papa seems sad." Elena glanced at Marco, who was pacing near the window, eyes fixed on the city beyond, shoulders stiff. His jaw was tight, lips pressed in a thin line. "He's worried," she said gently, "but he's strong. He'll be okay." Sophia frowned. "But what about us? What if they take us?" Elena's heart clenched. "No one will take you, not ever." And in that moment Marco's gaze softened as he looked at the two of them, the maid who had dared to touch his daughters, and the children who had taught him to soften. Something unspoken passed between them. Trust, fear, gratitude, and perhaps something more dangerous, something neither had admitted aloud. That night, Marco stayed in the nursery longer than usual, watching the twins sleep. Elena noticed, her hand brushing against his arm. For a moment, they simply existed in the quiet together. No words, no commands, only the steady rhythm of breath and trust. But the peace shattered the next morning. A note arrived on Marco's desk. The words cold, calculated, and personal. "You've built walls around your life. We will tear them down. The girl who dares to touch what's ours will regret it." Marco's hand clenched around the paper. His face was pale, a rare crack in the armor. Elena reached out, touching his shoulder lightly. "They won't hurt us," she said, steady, though her heart pounded. "Not if we face this together." He looked at her, vulnerability and admiration in his eyes. "You're reckless," he said quietly, "but I don't know if I can survive this without you." Elena's chest tightened. "You won't have to, you'll never have to." And in that charged silence, both understood the truth. The unthinkable she had done protecting, loving, nurturing the twins had created a bond that even danger could not sever. It was stronger than fear, stronger than threats, stronger than the walls he had built around his heart. Outside, the city waited, indifferent and dangerous. Inside, the Luca mansion held its own quiet war, and within it, Elena and Marco faced something far more perilous than bullets or threats, the slow, undeniable pull of hearts that refused to remain closed. The night stretched on, heavy with tension and unspoken promises. Elena knew this calm was temporary, but for the first time, she believed that together, they could withstand whatever came next. The night the threat became real, the mansion felt alive with tension. Elena was in the nursery, finishing a lullaby for Lucia, when a sudden crash echoed through the halls, louder, sharper, more deliberate than anything they had experienced before. The twins woke instantly, crying, reaching for her, and she scooped them up, murmuring reassurances. Her pulse raced. She could feel the air in the house shift, thick with danger. Marco appeared at the doorway within seconds, his presence magnetic, commanding, and terrifying all at once. His eyes scanned the room, then the shadows of the hallways beyond. Without a word, he moved toward the source of the noise, his movements precise and silent, every step calculated. Elena followed, heart pounding, cradling the twins tightly. "Marco, wait." He didn't stop. Couldn't. His empire, his daughters, the fragile bond forming in this house, they were all at risk. The intruders had breached the mansion's outer perimeter, men trained, silent, and merciless. Marco confronted them in the grand hallway, shadows flickering over his sharp features, as he moved with lethal precision. His hands, once only capable of signing contracts or ordering men, now struck with brutal efficiency. Each movement was decisive, controlled, yet beneath the surface, the weight of what he was defending pulsed through him. Elena stayed just behind him, holding the twins, ready to move them if necessary. She had learned to anticipate danger, to read the subtle signs, but watching Mark in action so powerful, so precise, filled her with awe and fear simultaneously. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, the intruders retreated, disappearing into the night. Marco stood in the hallway, chest heaving slightly, jaw tight. He looked at Elena, then at the twins, and something unspoken passed between them, a relief so deep it was almost unbearable. "You're safe," he said finally, voice low, more human than it had ever been. "All of you." Elena shook her head, heart still racing. "We're only safe because you were here, because you protect us." He glanced at her then, eyes dark and intense, and for a moment the power, fear, and control that defined him melted into something else entirely. Vulnerability, gratitude, something deeper, love perhaps, though neither spoke it aloud yet. "We protect each other," he said finally. "That's how it works." The twins, sensing the tension had lifted, clung to both of them. Sophia whispering, "Papa," Elena, Lucia, nestled into Elena's chest. And in that quiet, charged moment, the walls of fear and grief that had dominated the mansion for years began to crumble. Later, in the nursery, Elena held the girls close while Marco watched from the doorway. "You did the unthinkable," he said softly, almost to himself. "And it saved them and me." Elena swallowed. "I didn't think about what was unthinkable. I just wanted them to sleep, to be safe." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her and the twins, and for the first time he allowed himself to show his exhaustion, his humanity, his longing. "You've done more than that. You've made me see what I've been blind to, what matters beyond power, beyond fear, beyond control." Her chest tightened. "And what about you?" "I've changed," he admitted quietly, "because of you, because of them." Elena felt the words sink in. For months, she had been a caretaker, a protector, someone existing on the edge of his life. But now, she realized, she was central to it, not just for the twins, but for Marco himself. And the unthinkable she had done had brought them all here, together, stronger than any threat outside the walls. That night, as the city slept oblivious to the violence that had brushed so close, Marco finally allowed himself to hold Elena's hand, to close the distance he had fought so hard to maintain. The twins slept between them, safe, loved, and protected. And in that quiet, fragile peace, Elena understood something undeniable. Some acts of courage, some choices of love, change everything. And the unthinkable, once done, becomes the foundation on which new lives are built. Outside, the night waited. But inside the De Luca mansion, hearts had been forged. In fire, trust had been earned, and love unspoken but fierce held them together. The morning after the attack, the mansion felt different, lighter, fragile, but charged with a kind of peace Marco hadn't known in years. Elena moved quietly through the nursery, brushing a strand of hair from Sophia's forehead and smoothing Lucia's blanket. The twins stirred, yawning, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Their trust in her had deepened in the past weeks, cemented by shared fear, comfort, and laughter. Marco entered behind her, silent, powerful. yet somehow more human than she had ever seen him. "You stayed with them," he said softly, almost a statement, almost a question. "I had to," Elena replied. "They needed someone, and I couldn't leave them alone." He nodded, voice low. "You've done the unthinkable, twice now." Elena smiled faintly, brushing her hand along Sophia's arm. "Twice? I've only calmed them. Isn't that what any caretaker would do?" Marco's gaze softened as he approached. He crouched beside the twins, watching them sleep for a long moment before looking at her. "No caretaker could do what you have," he said. "You've given them peace when even I could not, and you've given me something I didn't think I could have again." Her chest tightened. She understood exactly what he meant. Marco De Luca, the untouchable, feared controlling, allowed her to touch the most sacred part of his life, his daughter's, and in doing so, had opened a door to his own heart. Elena swallowed, words catching in her throat. "You don't have to say it. I understand." He shook his head slightly. "No, you need to hear it. You've changed everything. For them. For me. For this house." The twins stirred, sensing the quiet gravity in the room. Sophia stretched her arms toward Marco, who lifted her into his strong hands. Lucia turned toward Elena, reaching for her with a tiny sigh. In that moment, the boundaries between duty and love blurred. Marco knelt beside the crib, Sophia cradled in one arm, eyes dark and intense, yet soft. "I used to think strength meant walls, control, fear. But now, I know it means protecting what you love, and letting it in, even if it scares you." Elena stepped closer, brushing his sleeve gently. "And letting yourself feel it." He nodded. "Exactly. And with you I've finally learned what that feels like. What it's like to risk everything not for power but for love." For the first time he allowed himself to linger, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him. The mansion, once cold, distant, and full of grief, felt alive with possibility. Later, in the quiet of the nursery, the three of them, Marco, Elena, and the twins sat together, a fragile, perfect family. He held Sophia, Elena cradled Lucia, and for the first time in years, no fear, no enemies, no threats dominated the space between them. Just trust, just warmth, just an unspoken promise that they would face everything together. Elena realized, finally, that the unthinkable she had done, calming two frightened children, stepping in the world of a powerful, haunted man, allowing herself to care so fully, had created something unbreakable. Love, courage, and trust had become their fortress. Marco brushed a hand across her cheek, gentle, deliberate. "You've saved them, Elena. And in doing so, you've saved me." Elena smiled, softly, tears glinting in her eyes. "Then we stay together. No more walls. No more fear. Just us." He nodded, a faint smile breaking across his usually stern face. "Just us." Outside, the city roared on, indifferent to the lives it had nearly shattered. Inside, the De Luca mansion glowed with quiet life, love and laughter apace. Once ruled by fear, now ruled by courage, trust, and unthinkable devotion. And as Marco, Elena, and the twins settled into a rare, perfect calm, one truth remained clear: the choice we fear most, the acts we think unthinkable, often create the strongest bonds and the most lasting love. The house, the children, the man, and the woman who dared to step into their lives together. They had survived everything. Together, they were home. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more cinematic Mafia love stories that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark.